we're gonna have to operate, I suppose. But to put it in short, especially after the recent events of September 10th, two prime examples between JD Vance taking over the Charlie Kirk channel and saying the dumbest shit I think I've ever heard, for the most part, especially throwing out statistics that we're gonna go over. That he's wrong because he's actually misinterpreting what the friggin' stats say on the YouGov.com political poll. Alright? A lot of information is getting misconstrued. And I'll show you
Now,
exactly
little
what
did
the effects of
Robinson.
that are. So let's not listen to Fox, but let's look at the comment section. I know, the worst thing you can possibly do, but this, whether they're bots or maybe even people, this is stupid. So this video in particular is about deranged man who covered for Kirk assassin, charged criminally, whatever. And as we found out yesterday, Tyler Robinson did mention about the crazy old man, right? This is the crazy old man. Which, mind you, maybe when we look at the nuances, I'm just going to call it here, dude probably just didn't like the political views, didn't give a shit, was like, well, since the right's always saying shit like this, you know, saying that deranged left-wing lunatic, no matter how many times CNN, CNBC, or ABC try to deny it, just blindly putting blame over here. Then go check out my video yesterday on me predicting exactly what this is going to end up being, exactly what Tyler Robinson's motives were, and why he had those motives. Okay? It's very clear because hate breeds hate, and when one side doesn't realize the amount of hate that they're putting on the line, then yeah, it's so ignorant and stupid. Saying snitching on yourself online is so this generation, they can't help but talk. Just ignorance, man. And I mean, what is that even supposed to mean, right? 71-year-old man should sure get jail time. He knew exactly what he was doing. You don't even know the situation. You have no idea, right? Man who diverted officers, so she jail time? Bro. Bro. Complete separate incident, whether or not this person even knew. Saying that should be charged with accessory after the fact at the very least. Is saying that this guy ran cover. Bro. The FBI screwed up. Thought it was this dude. It's the ignorance. It's the ignorance that's the problem. And another issue too is people that actually look into Charlie Kirk's stuff and some of these things without actually looking into some of the stuff that we're bringing up that he's been saying for a decade. And also 58% of lefties approve political violence apparently in a recent poll, which we're going to look at the poll anyways because it's this type of shit that's the brain rot that's allowing other people to believe the brain rot, and therefore more brain rot happens. It's a cascade of brain rot that is affecting society. Reminder, folks, they don't want to have a discussion, they want you dead. It's shit like this, which is why when we even look at this poll and analyze it, right, the YouGov poll that everyone, I guess, is talking about, because this is where I found it from the Hill argument, or whatever. It's bad. It's bad. And it's just the amount of brain rot and radicalization of a lot of these individuals and how they feel. It's like I said yesterday, it's a pendulum. They better prosecute a sick partner. What the fuck, man? The communists. The communists. The communists. It's always the communists. It's, look up Weimar. It's so easy. Weimar Republic. If you want to find out what they did to the communists, right? If you want to find out exactly how this path leads, when you start saying, oh, it's because of the communists that they're radicalized, or it's because of this, that, and the third. That's not how reality works. You can't just ignore nuance. You can't even ignore the words, the meanings of the words that are in these reports. So we'll go look at this U.gov. What Americans really think about political violence. So the statistic, when I was looking through this, we have most Americans say political violence is a very big problem or somewhat of a problem. Yes, Yes. Yes. That is bad. That is majority, 95% across the board. The very big problem. It's a problem. Easy. They actually go over Democrats and Republicans, which is something that no one else has went over, right? No one else has talked about. But are more likely to say political violence is a big problem after attacks on members of their own party, right? Which is obvious because this just happened September 10th, and we see the radical comments coming from the right. And we see a lot of people on the left not giving a fuck or being like, whatever. Like, clearly, if you don't like something and it goes away, even if it's another human being or whatever, people are going to be like, well, one less thing to worry about. And it's fucked up when you phrase it like that, right? Because I know a lot of people are just going to take that out of context, but that's the reality of reaction. And it's the reality of that whole pendulum, you know? You add force to that pendulum going one way, it's going to swing back harder, well, just as hard the way coming back, you know? At least, without any breaks, you know? That's exactly how it works. So, clearly, when things on the right on against people on the left wing happened, people on the right just didn't give a shit. But when things happen to people that they believe with on the right, they start giving more of a shit. And they start giving more of a shit. And you can see the trend here. Right here. It's getting more and more radical as more and more of these events happen. And it's like, even after the assassination of Charlie Kirk compared to Melissa Hortman, which was months apart, the amount of people that still believe that political violence is a big problem on the left is 2% higher even after that of Charlie Kirk. So, as this report makes it clear that even though there's a small percentage of people, and then when you look at the nuanced data of those groups of people that do believe that it's acceptable, which is right here. How many Americans say violence can be justified? So this is where the data is coming up. You see this 24%? This is the 24% that people are saying. But when you read the actual paragraph, right, it is true that liberal Americans are more likely than conservatives to defend feeling joy about the death. They're not saying that it's acceptable. They're saying that the words, right? They feel joy about the deaths of political opponents, right? And when the political opponents are saying that certain groups of people should be prisoners, we need more prisoners in this country, right? When they're calling for the death penalty and the imprisonment of Joe Biden, who, well, why are you calling for the death penalty of the president at the time? Mind you, these statements were made in 2024. Back in the day, those were those would be considered acts of treason. 100 years ago, if that was happening to past presidential, like anything, it's insane. And Charlie Kirk said those things. So you can logically see when someone is saying really bad things, right? And again, he was a father. His kid shouldn't have fucking witnessed that. His kid shouldn't have had to go through that. But at the same time, it's like, what the hell? It's because of the stupidity. It's because of the exponential buildup of stupidity, of ignorance, that's causing these feelings to be way more radicalized. Because I'm sure if Tyler had more of appreciation and respect for humanity in general, he wouldn't have done what he did. So I'll link the video, my prediction of basically exactly what happened. And unless we find out more about his family life, then we might not really ever know where the radicalization truly came from. You can say it was his friends and stuff, but we can already tell from the leaks yesterday and as the trial goes on and we actually see the court documents and stuff between his partner, his roommate partner, like love interest, right? Not partner in crime as people are suggesting under Fox News comments, right? But they didn't understand. They didn't know what the fuck was going on. They were hoping that Tyler wasn't the one that did this. They were all fucked up. Obviously, they They're a human being by the end of the day. They understood that regardless if it's Charlie Kirk or not, they understood this. Same thing with his friends on Discord. As we see from the messages there, they seemingly didn't really have a clue. And apparently Tyler only was thinking about this shit for like a week before he decided to do it. So it was very quick. But for all this ignorance that he's probably grown up seeing, and like I went over in the video before, you end up growing up believing that trans people are bad and all this other stuff. And as you see with some of the other conversations and information coming from his friend group, clearly there's some tension in the family. So unless we find out more from Tyler himself about his family life and how it was like growing up, then we're not really going to truly understand anything. And even then still, it's not like people are really going to listen at this point, because people don't want to read that in this statement, right? The actual percentage of liberal versus conservative, because it says 16% of liberals say this is usually or always acceptable. Within this percentage includes, right, 24% of the 16%. It's not 24% of liberals. You got to learn how to read sentences, right, in order. And this, including 24% of those who say their ideology is very liberal within that 16%. And then 10% who say they are liberal but not very liberal. So that's the range within that 16% that they're considering as liberal, quote unquote. So about a quarter of them that say out of the 16% are radicalized. So 24% of 16%. That's 4, 8, 12, 16. That's about 4%. When you want to say the radical right, it's 4%, compares to 4% of conservatives and 7% of moderates. So the radical leftists that you're claiming is actually tied with the amount of conservatives in general, when you do the friggin' math and you read. But clearly it's 16%, so it's about 4 times more. But this is, mind you, this isn't that they're promoting it, they're just saying that they feel joy about the deaths of political opponents. You know? There is a difference. There is a difference in those words. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that will feel joy when very bad people that have been saying hateful and spiteful things are punished in some way, shape, or form for their act, or held accountable for their actions, or at least they could have put them down on the debate stage and made a bunch of clips, right? But as we see with how these sorts of events run, that's typically not the case. And with the amount of money that's involved in these sorts of political events, there's a certain amount of media control as well. Because in between now and just how screwed up everything's gone with over the past like 10 years, again, we have timelines. And you can compare older and younger as well. Older people are obviously more concerned than younger people, but it's still over 50%. Still a lot of people. And a better look at all this is since what happened to Paul Pelosi. I mean, Democrats have almost always been above 50% worried that political violence is a big problem. People on the left have been condemning political violence for decades. And it's the people on the right that, depending on what happens, because every time it happens to someone on the left, they seem like, oh, they don't give a shit. And then when it happens to someone that aligns with their beliefs, all of a sudden they give a lot of a shit. And they give so much of a shit to a point that they forget how to read. So, this is where things are getting misconstrued. But even among the very liberal who share say that it's unacceptable to feel joy about the deaths of political opponents, outnumbers those who say, so this is of those that say they are very liberal, right? The radical left. 24% of those compared to 56%, right? And it's, again, we don't know, I guess, what's the total, including 24% of those who say. So this is off the 16%. So this is where the confusion starts being very prevalent. And then when they break it down by where they find themselves ideologically, and you see the percentages here. Then we also have not sure. So I don't know. You keep saying it's a very radical left, especially right after this incident. And mind you, acceptable doesn't always mean that you promote it, but more so, especially if you see people on the right after this saying the things that they've been saying, it makes it feel like it's acceptable because they're saying that the very liberal deserve to die. Inherently, they say that they need to go to prison. There's government officials that are saying that. That's what they're hearing. So if they believe that the conservative side, based on what they're hearing in media, on social media, and the comments that we just went over, the things that are being said, the amount of just stupidity and brain rot that's causing people to say these stupid things, especially people like Asmongold that's saying that 90% of political violence is caused by the left, or JD Vance misquoting percentages, because this isn't compared to these two put together. And same thing with here, because we've got a 5 and 7% here, right? The math ain't mathin'. This is just broken down from very liberal. Mind you, this is right after this incident, we see the things that people are saying. And this is not even about promoting political violence, but rather if they find it joy, if they're literally, the question is, do you generally consider it to be acceptable or unacceptable for a person to be happy about the death of a public figure? Not about the political violence, but to be happy about the death of a public figure. Not if they got assassinated, because they could have died from natural causes. That's the question, and this is the data that's being misconstrued for bullshit narratives. No, liberals includes those who say their ideology is liberal or very liberal, and conservatives includes those who say their ideology is conservative or very conservative. And then most Americans across the political spectrum say political violence is never justified, but younger and more liberal Americans are more likely to disagree. And mind you, they're reacting to the reactions on the right. So if they see that people are saying the things that they're saying online and they're reacting accordingly, just like how Tyler Robinson was hearing and growing up with the shit that he was, experiencing, right? Because Melissa Hortman wasn't saying the things that Charlie Kirk was saying. But clearly no one gave a shit. Like, clearly, conservatives don't give a shit. It doesn't go over 50% unless it's someone on their side. And it's insane. It is insane. It's just the amount of misconstrued information. Do you ever think it's justified for citizens to resort to violence in order to achieve political goals? Percentages. So, and then, violence in self-defense. Liberals and younger Americans are more likely to say that political violence can be justified, but are not more likely to defend violence in self-defense. Do you ever think it is ever justified for citizens to resort to violence in self-defense in order to achieve political goals? That's a fucking weird-ass question. Percentage saying yes, violence can sometimes be justified. So violence in self-defense, violence for political goals. So, I mean, even when you look at political ideology, when the breakdown, 68 to 71% that are like, sure, self-defense is fine. We got some differences, 18% and 7%, that say that political violence is justified for political goals. So this is probably the numbers that people need to be referring to. Not misconstruing the data that's up here, nor the questions that are up here, which is the point. And this is why it's a very delicate issue, and it's ridiculous the amount of stupidity that's allowed and not enough correction. Because these are the numbers that you want to look at, if anything, when you're making these comparisons. Because this is a more proper breakdown of the statements that are being made. And even then still, this isn't most people. So, just check out the article actually in depth and maybe get past halfway through the article before you start making stupid friggin' statements. Liberals and conservatives are likelier to say violence is from the other side is the bigger problem. Right? The pendulum. Swinging back and forth. And if you're not recognizing that, which left-wing violence and right-wing violence, it's equal on both sides. In fact, it's 33% believe it's so dumb, man. And the moderates are just sitting there like, what the fuck? I mean, moderates, liberals and conservatives are likely to say violence from the other side is a bigger problem. So moderates say that right-wing violence are the bigger problem, which this is probably a good estimation of the normal person's perspective. And then when you compare who says what, obviously you're going to get the big divide. But liberals say more often than not, conservatives are more likely to cause violence. And then conservatives, more likely than not, say that liberals are. And then the moderates actually, more likely than not, say that conservatives are the problem. That they're more likely to commit violence. And the data suggests that. The actual data that we went over in other videos, which I'll link, all say that. Because that's the trend. And it's between the reality of the actions that occur and the people behind those actions and their ideologies, when analyzed statistically and put out there as we went over, and there's many other people that have been going over it as well, and mind you, it's still a lot less than it was 50 years ago when comparing to the past 10 years, right? There's even been a few years, I think, what was it, 2023 and 2024, when there was no political violence from the left at all. It was only from the right. That was also reported. For 2 years, under Joe Biden's administration, the only violence that ever came was from the right. So there's your fucking 90% when you're looking at those 2 years. That's your 100% when you're looking at just those 2 years alone. This is why the divide is bigger than it's probably ever been before. This is why liberals feel conservatives are more likely to commit the violence, and then conservatives say that liberals are more likely to commit the violence. And you look at the numbers, you see dumbasses misinterpreting the data, misquoting the data, right? Not giving you the full context, not even saying what they're pulling the data from. It's just mass hysteria and brain rot, which is the problem. And especially in the wake of this issue when this poll was taken, right? Especially in the wake of this issue, of course, if people are saying the radical left, the very liberal, apparently, are the bad ones. and they're demonizing them in such a way to an extent that they want to mark them as terrorists, what do you expect them to feel? You're adding fuel to the fire, whether you realize it or not, because you're stating that, again, the Weimar Republic did the same shit, right? They blamed the communists before they started blaming the Jews, even though now they're blaming immigrants first instead of, well, they've always been blaming the communists, socialists, whatever. And even back then, communism meant something different than what it means today. It meant something different than what actual Marxism is. So it's just a bunch of words being thrown out there as propaganda tools, right? For anti-democratic forces. That's it. The belief among some groups that Germany's defeat in World War One, or in this case, the 2020 fake hoax election. You know, you can simply just read history and you see the patterns and you see how people are treating each other, right? You see how these things go. So, I don't know, trans roommates should get some jail time, even though they're the ones that cooperated with the FBI. They better prosecute his sick partner. Like this, why do you think the far left feels the way they feel? So, I don't know, man. You just need to friggin' take the time to actually look through shit instead of just believing what these dumbasses are saying online. But studies finds that Americans are more likely to express anti-democratic views. This is another report. People are more likely to support partisan violence when they think the other party does too. It's exactly what I'm saying. Literally what I'm saying. You see the right saying the things that they're saying. They've been saying it for the past decade or so. And then, even though the left's been condemning it for God knows how long, even when you look at the data that both left and right believe in self-defense, clearly, and there's only a slight difference in variation from those that believe in political action. So, or unethical political action, I'll call it. So, this is another article. Many politicians and influencers on the ideological right have blamed Democrats and the left for the murder of activist Charlie Kirk on Wednesday, September 10th. This even includes President Trump, which is an issue that I've been pointing out. You can agree, disagree, whatever. Who blamed radical left terrorists for Kirk's death despite having no evidence that the shooter was left-leaning. There's still no real evidence that he's particularly left-leaning, and just because he was bisexual doesn't mean that he's left-leaning. It doesn't mean that he's participating in politics. It doesn't mean that he's actually supporting the Democrats or the Republicans. Maybe you can say that, sure, he was worried about who was getting elected in 2024 or whatever. Big whoop. But again, unless we find out more about his family life, we're not really going to find out at all what his motives are. So it's up to him. And even if he speaks exactly what he did, that doesn't mean that the public's going to even believe it or agree with it when people like Trump, Elon Musk, Stephen Miller, all these people are just saying really outrageous and dangerous shit. And then people that, again, you go to any Fox News comment section and you see just hate, anger, just blatant, just stupidity. Like, they want more prisoners, man. And this is the feeling that this, again, keep adding more fuel to the fire, the pendulum keeps going one way. Goes all the way up, and then by the time it comes back down, is you don't have enough power to stop what comes next. And that's what's scary, you know? It's a fact of life, how things work. So this is not just dishonest, but as this person wrote on their piece on Friday, but dangerous. The blame game is being played by Trump and the likes of Elon Musk and Stephen Miller is borderline life-threatening. It is dangerous in part because voters largely follow the leader when it comes to public opinion. That is true. That is a fact, especially since they have such a big platform, right? So when leaders express support for partisan violence, followers are likely to adopt that belief. Some will even act on it. But the other thing is that will inevitably happen if these surrogates keep saying Democrats are the party of murder and need to be destroyed, is that Republicans will inevitably think that of the Democrats as more violent than they are in reality. The share of Republicans who think most Democrats support partisan violence will increase sharply. So, according to paper links to in the Friday column, that will in turn increase the rate at which Republicans themselves support violence against Democrats. The paper shows that Democrats and Republicans overestimate the share of the other party that approves partisan violence. So this was those percentages that we left off at. 239% to 489%. 2.4 times 4.9 times. So this paper shows how political violence is a psychological arms race, with neither side wanting to be caught flat-footed against the opposition. Nobody wants to bring a pen to a gunfight. This is a natural instinct when you come to view your political opponents as opposing tribe threatening to wipe you out. This is exactly what I've been calling out. So social media plays a big role. Like I said in the other video, the algorithm, the big effect. So I implore you to look at this article. This does actually make sense and helps to correct the data from the YouGov study, right? So figure 2, support for violence study 3 and willingness to engage in violence study 4A by condition. Note response options differ between measures. SPV is scaled from 0 to 100. WEV is scaled from 1 to 4. All right, so 0 to 100, 1 to 4. Average support for partisan violence, the control group, it's like about 80%. The correction, about 50%. And then here, same thing. In other words, we could decrease aggregate support for partisan violence by roughly half if we gave everyone the correct data on this question. This is why I'm making these fucking videos. This is why I'm pointing out the actual statistics. This is why I'm going into these reports and debunking the bullshit that JD Vance and Asmongold are saying, and other people with large media followings. The things that the president, that Donald Trump Jr. is saying, that Eric Trump. So, whether you like it or not, it's the truth, man. And this is where the radicalization gets more radical, is from the misunderstanding, the chaos that's being ensued, as we see in every comment section now, on social media, on YouTube videos, especially even my own videos. It's insane. No way in Hades that his boyfriend didn't know. Arrest him too. Capital punishment for all who helped. Like, what do you expect? What do you expect? And mind you, this is a video about the old guy that they freaking thought was the shooter that got caught up in all this. Deranged man who covered for. Maybe this dude can sue for defamation in some way or not. I don't know. I would like to actually find out more about what happened with this guy. And maybe if we can get some body cam footage of the incident, of the arrest, then that would help clear up a lot more. Even though by the time that happens, no one's going to fucking pay attention to it. None of these people are going to look at that. None of these people are going to look at this video that I'm making. So, and that's part of the problem. That's why social media is as bad as it is. That's why I skipped it. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. This is why we have this. Extreme views and narratives are overrepresented on social media. Estimated share of content from each format with given political slant. Hard left, hard right. And make sure you read the small print. For social media, data reflects the political views of people posting political content. Due to the lack of representative data on political views of journalists, numbers for others forms of media reflect the political views of their audiences. So this, when looking at social media in particular, cable TV you can say is the regular news, which typically has a hard right slant, more right-leaning being represented on cable TV, and that would be your mainstream news networks. For social media, they're going off what the audience believes in. Left-right scale combines responses to 61 values questions. So make sure that when you're looking at data that you're reading it correctly. Make sure you take the time to read these things correctly, because then things will make more sense and you can represent it better. So, and also the facts behind what's going on anyways, because even though people are saying that political violence isn't justified or is justified, depends on what they consider to be political violence for one, or self-defense. That's another question. Because if someone on the right is saying that the liberals are trying to take away my rights for my weapons, is that a self-defense answer, or is that a political violence for political goals answer? You see where a lot of this can get misconstrued simply on the questions that are being asked or mentioned, like the data that's about people feeling happy about the death of a public figure they oppose. Right? But then that's being misconstrued with, oh, well, these people think it's absolutely acceptable to assassinate their political opponents. Those are two completely different statements. Completely different statements with completely different meanings. So I implore you to look this stuff up. I'll link it below.